Welcome back to Worst Seats in the House. Michael Russo, Anthony LaPanta. I'm coming from Raleigh, North Carolina. Anthony's coming from Tampa Bay or Tampa, Florida. And you're back on the baseball beat, Anthony. Doing play-by-play yesterday. How was that?
It was fun. I love baseball. It's fun to get back behind the mic for ball games, filling in for Corey Provis for this series in Tampa. And a little weird though. This is of all the places to jump back in. The Rays this year are playing at George Steinbrenner Field, the spring training home of the Yankees, because of the damage Hurricane Milton did to the Tropicana Dome, where they usually played their home games. And so it's a little weird. You're in a minor league ballpark, and it's lighting isn't quite as good. The sight lines aren't as good. The booth is tiny. It kind of feels like you're back in Girderville, like calling a game in Winnipeg or something. But it's been fun. Justin Morneau is a lot of fun. There's been more than a few hockey references during this series on the air. Justin, in the first inning of game one, there's a line shot down the first baseline, and he dropped in a glove save and a beauty right away. So I knew we were going to be in a good spot.
That's awesome. And then and you're not going to really get to have any good meals, right? Because of the whole you got in late and got a day game today and everything.
Yeah, that's part of the difference of baseball travel compared to hockey travel, and it's every time it's just weird, the way that the team functions, the charter protocol and all of that. It's just little subtle differences. But one of the differences between baseball and hockey is that for hockey, almost every day is a travel day because you're either flying in and it's the night before the game, or it's game day and you're packing up all your stuff to leave. And I always tell people that even though our travel couldn't be any better, couldn't be any easier, we're staying in great places, flying on charter jets, it's still travel days. You're still packing up everything you have with you and leaving or arriving in a hotel. The difference for baseball is that you're in the same city for 3 or 4 days when you come in, but to your point, you never have a night off. And we got in late on Sunday night, about 10 o'clock when we got to our hotel. So there was no dinner really. And then night games, Monday and Tuesday night. So I did find this place down the street. We're staying out in St. Petersburg and found a place that was open late and had the same fish tacos meal the last 2 nights at about 11 o'clock at night when the game was over. So nothing terrific, nothing special, but it's funny just talking to guys because hockey players come into town, they go out to dinner on the night off. Baseball players eat almost every meal through room service. They don't have a team meal at the hotel like the hockey team does before the game. And after games, if the hockey team's staying, they usually have a meal at the hotel. The baseball team, everybody's on their own. They just order room service. And so I heard on the bus yesterday, everybody talking about what they ordered from room service. I was like, I haven't ordered a room service meal on the road with a hockey team in 14 years.
Yeah, I have not. That used to be. I used to do that all the time. I don't remember the last time I've had food delivered to my room. I mean, every now and then you do Uber Eats and things like that.
Which
But
I've also never done, which is weird. I mean, I've never one time in my life ordered Uber Eats. The last time I probably ordered food to be delivered to my house was the last time I ordered pizza, which would have been probably 20 years ago. I mean, it's weird. It's just different, but
yeah,
it's fun. I love doing baseball games. I've got one more series on my schedule for now, at least. I only really know my schedule through June, but I've got a radio series when the Twins get home from this trip, and it's a weird trip for the Twins. They go from Tampa to Seattle, and then to play the Athletics, who are also playing in a minor league ballpark in Sacramento this year. So they're going to catch the two minor league stadiums on the same trip. And the reason why this series was added, this originally was supposed to be a series played in Minnesota, but because of the weather, and you know this as well as any of us, in Florida in the summertime, it rains every day at like 3 o'clock for like an hour and a half or 2 hours. And they didn't want to have Tampa playing a bunch of home games during that time because they're now playing outside. So they flopped this series. It was supposed to be, I think Tampa was supposed to be at Target Field around the 4th of July, or well, they were supposed to be, the Twins were supposed to be in Tampa around the 4th of July. So now that series is going to be in Minnesota, this one here. So that's why the road trip is so strange. But I was just telling some guys when I was doing radio for the Twins in the late 90s, we had a road trip that for some reason went Tampa to Seattle. And they had an off day in the middle. So the team charter flew on the day off. And on the way to Seattle, we stopped in Salt Lake City to watch the AAA team play. Can you imagine now a team charter taking on a day off, stopping to watch a minor league team play, and what the uproar would be from the Players Association and the veteran guy in any league? But the whole team, we just stopped in Salt Lake City, had lunch. Terry Ryan was the GM at the time. He wanted to watch the Salt Lake Buzz play, so they were the Twins AAA team. We stopped in Salt Lake, and I had remembered the story this year when the Wild went to Salt Lake because people had asked me about being in Salt Lake. I said, I haven't been here for 25 years, and the only time I was here for about 4.5 hours in the middle of the day on a flight from Tampa to Seattle. But it's a little different times now. That wouldn't fly.
Yeah, we had a Panther trip once they played Tampa at home on a Saturday at Miami Arena, and then they played in Vegas. In San Jose on a Wednesday. So Terry Murray brought the entire team to Vegas. It was in December. They're at the time were one of the top teams in the league, and then they go to Vegas. They're there for 3 days. That was when I don't know if you remember when, I think you could see it in that Michael Jordan ESPN special, but when Dennis Rodman just like took off, just was missing from the Lakers, and he was found in Vegas. I actually saw him on that trip in Vegas playing craps at Caesars. But anyway, we're there for 3 days.
So you were the one that uncovered the whereabouts of Dennis Rodman.
If there was Twitter right there, back then, I would have definitely broken this story. But what was crazy about that one is then they go to San Jose, and then it just absolutely the Panther season went to you know what from there, and from that point on, let's put it this way, they didn't take any mid-season trips for vacations. The Panthers, well, I was covering them at least. You know what's interesting about covering the Panthers this series is, and I thought it was just during the playoffs, like last year. Obviously, anytime they played Edmonton, they spent the night in Edmonton, but they did that same thing against the Rangers and the Bruins last year in the first two rounds, and Tampa Bay. And I just thought that was something they did for the playoffs. They're doing it here again and again in Raleigh. Like, no matter what happens tonight, when the Panthers play the Carolina Hurricanes, win or lose, they're going to spend the night here, even though it's an hour and 20-minute flight back to Fort Lauderdale. They'll get their sleep and then fly tomorrow morning. That is something that they do almost every single trip, as long as it's not a back-to-back. It's something Jacques Lemaire used to do whenever we'd go west. We'd always spend the night, or you practice at home, or you'd fly in the morning and then practice in the road city. That's something that Panthers do, they just value their sleep as a weapon. And
the Wild have done that more the last couple of years, especially coming home from the West Coast.
Yeah.
We've stayed over in just about every city coming back east, just because of the time change. Most of the time, I mean, especially in the playoffs, where you don't know if the game goes to an extra session, just how long it could go. But even in the regular season, those flights home, if you're coming from Vancouver or LA or something, where you don't even leave until 11 or slightly after local time, and a 3+ hour flight and 2 hours of lost time in terms of time zones. I mean, you're talking about it's 5 o'clock in the morning before guys are getting home and into their beds. So the Wild have made that choice when coming back from the West Coast, but everything else, and I always appreciate getting home. I'd always rather get home that night, but I certainly understand that for the player's standpoint, it makes more sense to stay on a regular rest routine.
Yeah. All right. So our next live show is to be determined. We'll have at least one in June. If this series ends tonight and Dallas that series ends in 5 with Edmonton up 3-1, the Stanley Cup final is going to start June 4th, if not June 7th. So most likely, and then it's all going to be a long series. If it is a long, there's 3 days between the travel days and things like that. Unless it starts the 4th, the cadence gets all messed up. But most likely between the time I'm back from the Stanley Cup final and the draft is when we'll do our live show, and it'll either be at Tuttle's LC's or Split Rock. So pay attention to that. Anthony, how much playoffs have you gotten to watch? This it looks like we're going to have a potential gentleman's sweep here in the Carolina Florida series. I think Carolina delayed the inevitable. They were impressive in Game 4, Anthony. They'd gotten their butts kicked, outscored 16-4 in the first 3 games of the series. And then they have a 3-0 win in Game 4 that included 2 empty netters by Aho and Stahl. But it was impressive the way, for the first time in the series, the Panthers didn't bully them. They were the slower team. Carolina stood up for themselves. They were more physical. They got the better goaltending. Even though Bobrovsky was great, Anderson was just as good. And really, I just wonder, can you do that for 3 more games to try to force this into an actual series? It just felt so out of character by Carolina, because that's the one thing about this Florida team. They just have this brashness about them. They went up 6-1 in Game 2, and that's when they decided, or Game 3, and that's when they decided that, like, all right, now we're really going to go after Carolina with extracurriculars and things like that. They just have it is no hold barred hockey. It's old school in the way that they take numbers and get you back if you do some sort of misjustice early in the season. It's been a really fascinating series that way. Not a lot of compelling things because it hasn't been very competitive, but at least they force a Game 5 tonight, Carolina.
Yeah, I have watched most of the games. Actually, it's just kind of worked out where I shouldn't admit this, but during the Twins games, the last couple nights, we've had the Stanley Cup playoffs on the iPad and the press box just to make sure we're keeping an eye on it. And there really wasn't much to watch in the series you're covering. I just felt like Carolina had to win one. It's Rod Brindamore's personality alone. It just felt like he would not. Somehow they were going to will their way to win one game and put a stop to it. But I agree with you. I think it just feels like delaying the inevitable. I think Florida probably wins it in Game 5, and they've been by far the better team in that series. Carolina's had no chance. It had no chance in the first 3 games, where it felt like from the drop of the puck, you knew that it was going to be a long night for the Hurricanes. And it's weird because I thought going into the series, Florida would win and would win in a relatively short series. I thought it would be, in fact, I think I picked a 5-game win for Florida, but thought at the outside 6. But I didn't think the games would be as one-sided.
Yeah.
I thought the games would be more competitive. I just thought Florida would probably have too much strength, too much size. They'd be too heavy, too physical for Carolina. But that Carolina style, I've heard a bunch of people making comments like, well, the Carolina style doesn't carry over to the playoffs. And I just don't know if that's true. I think they've just run into teams over these trips to the finals that have just been better than them. And I think Florida's an example of that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I do think, though, that, I don't know who could beat. Maybe Edmonton can, with just outskilling them. I mean, what's really gone into Florida's favor here is they've scored first in 3 of the 4 games. The one game they didn't, they lost. I mean, when Florida, part of their MO is if they get the lead, they could just continue to pound you. They don't sit back. They never sit back. But they just continue. It just plays right into their hand. So it'll be interesting if they play Edmonton for the second time in a row here in a Stanley Cup final rematch. If what Edmonton learned from last year. Edmonton is playing incredible hockey right now. I don't think anybody expected what they're doing in Dallas, and we could talk about that series after the break. But Edmonton did win 3 games in a row to force a Game 7 last year against Florida. So it'll be really interesting to see how they, if that series comes into fruition, how they play. But the thing with Carolina is I just don't think that their personality, the size differential, the lack of meanness in their roster, can go head to head against a team like Florida that wants to bully you. I mean, it has been really fascinating how Brad Marchand has just fit right into the personality of this team with Matthew Tkachuk and Sam Bennett and the AJ Greers and the Gadjeviches. And these are physical players that talk smack and all that stuff. And he's just fit in like a glove. And it's been, I did want to talk to you about Brad Marchand because I have a new appreciation for him. You see him from afar all these years, and you just think, what a little rat on the ice, all the little things that he does to get under people's skin. And then you get with him. Oh my God. Like if he was in the Wild room, he would be a go-to for us both, Anthony. He is an absolute pleasure to cover. I've gotten a lot of mileage out of him already in this series.
Yeah, and that I don't think that's necessarily surprising in that I'm talking about it from the play on the ice standpoint, where so many times when you're covering the opposition and you see a player once and then you might see him again in 3 months, and even if you're watching some of the games on TV, it's just different when you watch a guy play for 7 or 14 or whatever 20 games in a row when you're covering a team in the playoffs like this, because you for certain start to gain an appreciation for some of the other things they do, the other things they bring, and what their role is behind the scenes. And he does seem like a perfect fit for that club. I mean, that's why it was probably such a great rivalry between he and guys like Tkachuk when those teams had met in the playoffs when he was in Boston, was because they seemed to play at least to some degree, a similar role for their different teams at that time and now together. And the other thing that's jumped out to me is I've really gained a new appreciation for Paul Maurice as a head coach over these few years in Florida. And yeah. I remember when he left Winnipeg, and I was talking to some of the, I have a good friend who calls the Winnipeg games on the radio, Paul Edmonds, and we were talking after his time in Winnipeg had come to an end, and he said, you know what, I learned more about hockey and life in the NHL from Paul Maurice than anybody I've ever covered. And I didn't think a lot of it. I always thought he had a strange presence and delivery when the Wild would see Winnipeg. And, that was at a time where some of those games were the games where there had been cheap shots delivered by Winnipeg players. And I thought the way he talked about them was always a little strange. And now all of a sudden, I love, like, his quote the other night was golden. I mean, I know you shared the quote that he had about would you shotgun a beer at church, which I thought was funny.
That was to me, by the way.
Yeah, I know. That's what I said. I knew that.
Yeah.
I know you were the one who had asked that question, and which I thought was a great answer. But I loved his comment the other night after somebody asked him about how Bobrovsky had played in Game 4, and he said, "Well, I thought he was terrible on the last two." And
yeah,
the last two were empty netters. I mean, and it's quick. He just has such a.
Yep.
He deflects so much from the rest of his team. I think all of it is so well thought out, and I've really gained an appreciation for what he's accomplished down there. And I remember when he went down there, and the year before they had won the President's Trophy, and then they barely got in the playoffs. And the number of times during that playoff run where he said, because people had said, like, it took a while to get the team to buy into his system, and he said, yeah, well, I came in and it took a team from the President's Trophy to barely getting in the playoffs in eighth spot. So I guess it took him a little while to embrace that plan. I mean,
yeah,
just the way that he would say things like that. But he's exactly right. He had to change the way that team played, because remember, it was Andrew Burnett's club, and it was a somewhat similar personnel, but very different style of play. And obviously Tkachuk wasn't there at that time before Maurice got there, so that's one big difference. But still, it's really amazing how he has transformed that club to play the game the way they play it now, and they are going to be a handful no matter who meets them in the final.
Yep, couldn't agree with you more. Let's take a quick break.
Hey, home repairs cannot wait. If you have flickering lights, gurgling toilets, virtually anything, Aquarius Home Services not only handles it, but handles it fast. And having a trusted plumber or electrician on call keeps your home running smoothly, which is why right now, for a limited time, you've got to take advantage of this deal. You could save $98 on electrical or plumbing repairs from the pros at Aquarius Home Services. That's $98 off. In fact, that's an interesting number, right? Maybe it's to honor the buyout payment of a couple $98 million deals coming largely off the books for the Wild. Who knows? But $98 off, too good of an opportunity to pass up, don't you think? So visit Aquarius Home Services right now to get started. That's AquariusHomeservices.com. Aquarius, earning the right to be recommended. And don't forget to mention that Russo sent you.
There are many reasons to open a smart checking account at Royal Credit Union, including no monthly fees, no minimum balance, and a $250 bonus. Getting your $250 is easy. Open your account by May 31st, receive 2 payroll direct deposits of $200 or more, and you'll get a $250 bonus. See details and open your account today at rcu.org/checking bonus. No minimum balance required to obtain bonus. Offer ends 5/31/25. Insured by NCUA.
Hey, have you been dreaming of a lake cabin lifestyle with boating, fishing, and family fun in northern Minnesota? Well, lately I've thought a lot about how cool it would be to have a getaway like so many Minnesotans. And if you're like me, you probably think that owning your own lakeside getaway is beyond your budget. Well, if you think lake cabin real estate prices keep going up, well, think again. This is Russo, and I'm here to tell you there is an affordable way to enjoy a cabin lifestyle and all that goes with it. And yes, I said affordable. I founded a Clamshell Beach Resort, which is located on the Whitefish chain of 14 lakes for you and your family to enjoy. Here's how. Clamshell has lake homes that offer deeded fractional ownership, and the keywords there are deeded and fractional. You own it. Imagine having 5 weeks a year to enjoy Clamshell with its beaches, pool, and lodge that's full of kids' activities. Is golf your game? There's a great golf course right across the road. Like winter sports? Well, you can go ice fishing, cross-country skiing, or snowmobiling right out the door at Clamshell. And there's no maintenance, no grass mowing, no snow removal. It's done all for you. And you can own a share of Clamshell Beach Resort at an affordable price. To learn more about ownership opportunities at Clamshell Beach Resort, go to cottagesonwhitefish.com or contact Pat Egan at 612-220-9819. That's cottagesonwhitefish.com or Pat Egan at 612-220-9819.
Back here, Worst Seats in the House, Michael Russo, Anthony LaPanta. Totally agree with you on Paul Maurice, Anthony. He just has this, I mean, he's hilarious. This is quick wit. It's truly, thought of at the time. The shotgun the beer thing analogy came to him too quick. I still kind of think that one he's used before, maybe not publicly, but behind and for people that didn't hear, basically what I asked is, how do you, can you explain the contradictions in style? Like, on the ice, you're a bunch of cocky little bastards, and off the ice, the second you get off, there's so much respect shown to the opponent. Guys like Bobrovsky and Barkov talk about humility all the time and just resetting and recovery. And is it real, or is it how do you explain that contradiction? What he asked is, have you ever shotgunned a beer? And I'm like, yeah, I have. Not recently, but I have. Have you ever been to church?
Really?
Yeah.
You've shotgunned a beer before?
Yeah, back in my early days.
I will confess that I didn't happen to read your story or see your quote, but somebody else sent it to me and asked the question, do you think Russo shotgunned a beer? And I actually said, no, I didn't think he probably ever had.
No, I have quit beer, but I used to.
Well, I know you've quit beer,
it did not.
But how often did you shotgun a beer?
Well, I wouldn't say that I did it often, but I would do it at concerts or parties or whatever.
Huh.
Yeah.
All right. That surprised me a little bit.
A different side of me. And then he asked the thing, would you shotgun a beer at church? That doesn't make you a hypocrite, is what he was saying. And his point was, and it's true, if you meet Matthew Tkachuk off the ice, he's the most engaging, nice personality. Sam Bennett's raising money for, rescue dogs and cats and animals and things like that. Brad Marchand, when you talk to him in the locker room, he is the most incredible player to deal with. I mean, just absolutely a dream to cover. And that's his point, is that, that the second the puck drops, they're different human beings. And we've seen that for years in the NHL. Ryan Hartman, great guy. You drop the puck and he's a different human being. Marcus Foligno, great guy. But the second you put him on the ice, it doesn't matter who you are, he'll put you through the glass. I mean, that's just the nature of hockey players. And that's his point. The difference in this situation is it feels like they have an entire team that does it. Like, even Carter Verhaeghe plays with grit, as good as he is. So it's a fascinating thing. But to your point, it's been really cool. Years ago, and I've told this before, when his first stint with Carolina, and I was a young up and coming writer with Florida and thought I knew everything, he and I had some run-ins. And when he was with Toronto, and I don't even know if he'll remember this, but I was covering a draft And he was at a coaching symposium, and I was waiting, I think, for Jacques Lemaire outside the ballroom to get him. And Maurice left the room to go to the bathroom, and he came out, and he and I talked, and we talked about sort of the old days, and we kind of patched things up right there. And then when he got to Winnipeg, we were really, really cordial with each other. And now the last 3 years, this is 3 years in a row that I've covered Panthers playoff runs. It's unbelievable the funny back and forths that he and I have had in these pressers that have sort of gone viral. And that was just sort of the latest the other day. But he is, to your point, I enjoy covering Florida's perspective during these playoffs, because even if you go to practice and you have nothing to write about, that Paul Maurice is going to say something that's going to write your story for you that day. and it's been terrific to cover him. Let's talk about that Dallas Edmonton series. I think the shocking part of this series is how well Edmonton has defended, with the exception of the third period of game one. They have controlled every period in this series. Dallas cannot score other than Mikko Rantanen. Jason Robertson's had a couple lately, but they, wouldn't you agree that going into this series, you would almost look at Edmonton's depth as being the biggest concern, and that Dallas would get the more depth scoring, and it's been the complete opposite. Edmonton's getting it. They do not need to have Draisaitl and the McDavid on the ice to win those shifts. It has been a totally different series than I thought this would be, and frankly, a playoff run for them.
Yeah, I think so too. We've been talking a lot about this over the last couple of days, and there's a couple things that stand out to me. One is I thought Dallas would win this series, and even going into last night, I thought Dallas was going to find a way to win Game 4 and would still win the series. And I'd argue a little bit. I thought last night in the first period, Dallas was dominant. Mm-hmm. They just couldn't score. And then Edmonton gets the one power play. Draisaitl doesn't miss from the spot where he never misses, and it's 1-0, even though Dallas, I think the shot attempts were something like 40-15 for Dallas in the first period last night. But that's kind of been the theme for Edmonton, is they've been able to withstand some storms like that at key points in the series and stay in games. And then all of a sudden their firepower has taken over. And so before you think back to the opening round, do you remember the specifics of that series? I mean, LA had won the first two. They had scored 6, I think, in each game. Game 3, Edmonton had to come from behind late to win. But
when Byfield had
no, that
turnover.
was Game 4. So Byfield has the puck on his stick with a 1-goal lead and 22 seconds left in the game. If he chips the puck off the glass, LA's up 3-1 going home for Game 5. And instead, he turned it over, leaving the zone. Edmonton scores with the extra attacker to go to overtime, and then they win it in overtime. But it seems like every year, somewhere in the playoffs, let's go back to Florida in their first run when Boston's got, in fact, it was Marchand who had the breakaway for Boston that could have won that series. And all of a sudden, he doesn't score. Florida wins the game in overtime, and they come from behind to win that series. It's amazing how many times a team snatches a win early where they go on their way out the door of the playoffs, and instead they get that win, they square that series, and since then they haven't looked back. And in this series with Dallas, I think what has jumped out to me is if you had told me going in that they were going to be leaning on John Klingberg to play the minutes that he's played, to play Troy Stetcher, to play Brett Kulak is playing 22 minutes a night for them. There's a guy that he's never played 20 minutes a game in a season in his career. And in this playoff run, I think he's averaging 23 minutes a night. They're leaning on guys that you never would have thought you could lean on in the playoffs. And not only are they, which has always been their demise, but they just haven't been able to defend. And they've done this with Ekholm on the sidelines here lately. And that I never in a million years would have thought that is how Edmonton would be winning these series. That and goaltending from Stuart Skinner, who, again, I gave up 6 in the first couple of games of the playoffs. He looked like he did lose his job at one point during the playoffs, but he has been simply outstanding.
Yeah, no, that to me has been the biggest surprise for the Oilers is just that, Pickard gets hurt after replacing him and Skinner comes in and he's just absolutely unbelievable. So truly remarkable stuff. Let's do this. Let's take a break and we'll come back and we'll talk about the Minnesota Wild.
Have you ever driven past a piece of land and wondered who owns that? Or maybe you need to know exactly where a property line runs? That's where Onyx Hunt comes in, and it's not just for hunters. There are folks using Onyx for their jobs every day throughout the country. From farmers and ranchers mapping out their fields, wildland firefighters navigating rough terrain, to construction workers needing to know who owns what property, this app offers something for everyone. If you need the best land ownership maps, aerial imagery, and property boundaries in your pocket, Onyx Hunt is the tool for the job. Try it for free for 7 days. Download Onyx Hunt in the app or Google Play Store or visit onyxmaps.com/hunt to get started. If you're looking for a refreshing THC drink, well, check out Giggly. It tastes like your favorite cocktail with no aftertaste and just pure, bold flavor. It's made with real fruit juice and all natural ingredients. It's a Minnesota-made gem. You can find it at liquor stores and Quick Trip locations across Minnesota, or get it shipped nationwide. Plus, with a new low pricing and low calorie options, it's the perfect guilt-free sip. Try Giggly today.
We love supporting local businesses. We love working with local businesses. I started buying stuff at Twill in the Edina Galleria a long time ago. When I started this podcast network, I was really hoping I'd be able to work with Scott Dayton, the founder and owner of Twill, and I was lucky enough to be able to do so. Now my closet is pretty much all Twill stuff. I don't get free stuff. I don't get discounts. I don't ask for discounts. I go there and pay full freight because I want to support a local business also because the stuff is awesome. Just bought a fresh batch. I'm about to go on a vacation with my wife. Everything I'm packing is Twill stuff because it wears well. It's comfortable. It doesn't wrinkle on planes. It doesn't wrinkle in suitcases. It comes out looking good. It wears like iron, and I'm never going to have to replace it. It's just so simple. Everything from casual shoes to dressy shoes to golf stuff to dress stuff to suits. By the way, you get everything tailor fit, which really helps me out. And everything from, gopher stuff to winter stuff to summer stuff. They just have everything. So go to twillmn.com, sign up for email updates. They won't send you anything unless they have a very specific event they want you to know about. They won't spam you. And go in there and say hello. Tell them we sent you. It's just a pleasant group of knowledgeable people. They are experts at what they do. It's the best men's clothing store in Minnesota. Go check out Twill online and in person in the Edina Galleria.
Back here, worst seats in the house, Michael Russo, Anthony LaPanta. And Anthony, obviously, huge month ahead coming up for the Wild draft where they don't have a first-round pick, but they do have a second. I think everything is going to be coming toward prepping for what this team is going to look like next year. The big story, obviously, is Marco Rossi and his future with the Minnesota Wild. What do the Wild do with him? Do they figure out a way to re-sign him, or do they trade him? His name is definitely being still dangled out there. There are a lot of people that think that he could be had right now, and it just will be interesting to see. Right now, the Minnesota Wild are having pro meetings. I'm sure that Bill started to set the table, is starting to figure out what, if he trades Marco Rossi, he can get for him. And then how do you respond? Do you get back what you want in that trade in terms of players that can play right now, or do you figure out a way to go make either further trades to add to this team, or go into free agency July 1 with sort of a clean slate and try to get your players there? What's your thoughts going into this month?
Well, it's none of it's really changed for me. Is that I still believe that the situation, and it's kind of the same thing that I was saying all of last summer, is that I just don't. The Wild aren't in a spot where they have to move Rossi. So, however hard they could be shopping him, and I don't know for certain that they are, but let's assume they are, which you seem to know that they are. You still have to get the right deal for him, and you don't. It isn't a spot, and I always use Fiala as the analogy. Everybody in the league knew the Wild had to trade Kevin Fiala because the math didn't work. With Rossi, you're not in that spot. So no matter what you think or how hard you want to make the move, if the right deal's not there, then bring Rossi back. And I don't know if that is a bridge that's reparable after you had talked earlier on a show about the fact that his side had said no to a 5x5 deal. Like, I don't know if you can get back to that. I still think that's a fair number. I think it's a number that I think makes sense for both sides in this spot. Obviously, Rossi's camp doesn't agree with me. And, I did start to do a little digging into what some of those salary projection websites had to say, and I saw a lot of those were saying that they think Rossi's more of a 7x7 kind of player, and I don't know that I'd be ready to make that commitment if I was Bill Guerin. I just don't.
Well, that's to your point, Anthony. That's how we've gotten here. They don't think he is, and the problem is now the way that he was utilized in the playoffs. One thing that's complicating matters here is that he does not have ARB rights. Now, he has offer sheet rights, but he cannot go to ARB. So the Wild could always look on, all right, let's go to arbitration. Either he chooses it or we choose it, and he gets a 1 or 2 year reward, and we just punt this down the road. He does not have ARB rights. So now, because of the way that he was utilized in the playoffs, Rossi's camp, even though they countered that 5x5 with a shorter term deal, that is no longer on the table, because the whole point, and we've discussed this to the last couple shows, Anthony, the whole point of signing a bridge deal when you're the player and a team is that the team is saying, all right, prove it to us again. And they're saying, all right, we're going to now have a couple really good years here. And then in a couple of years, you either decide to trade us, or now I've proven to you that I am a 7x7 or an 8x8 type player. But now, if Marco Rossi is worried, like, all right, where am I going to play over the term of the short-term deal? And are they going to put me on the third or fourth line, and I'm not going to be able to produce the way that I can to make my home run contract? He's not even going to risk signing a deal like that. And that's where I think his camp is at right now, and why I think that this is a bridge that can't be gapped. That's just if the Wild aren't willing to sign him to that 7x7, and he didn't want a 5x5, and now the Rossi is not willing to take a bridge deal, there just doesn't seem to be a lot of ways to rectify this situation. So I genuinely believe that this is sort of the end of the line here, and that we are going to see him move. And now the question is, what do you get from him? This is a guy that in the last 2 years has only gotten better. He's 23 years old, 20 some odd goals this year, 60 points. That is a $7 million player in today's NHL. If Coronado is getting 6 point whatever. So it's just going to be really fascinating what Billy can get for him, because you sure hope that you use him in a way that's going to bring valuable assets back to this organization.
Yeah, I agree with all that. And the other part of it is that for players, they typically, signing a shorter term deal gives them unrestricted free agency at a younger age, where they can, you called it a home run contract. And I'm sure that's the deal here, is that if you sign a 3 or 4 or even a 5 year deal, now you get that big unrestricted contract at an age of 27 or 28, where you can demand a lot more than if that comes at 31, say. And that's what teams are usually, that's what they're buying when they sign to that longer deal. They're saying, all right, we're going to buy a couple of your prime free agency years from you, and therefore the number goes up. But I also think at some point, you just kind of have to trust Billy's ability to make the right decision there. He did with Fiala, where he had to trade him. Other teams know that, and yet he was able to make a home run trade there. That, granted, there might have been a little luck involved getting a better player than even what they thought in favor. But bottom line is they identified him, and they ended up with a first round pick and a top pair defenseman for a player that everybody in the league knew you had to trade. And so right now, as you start to look around and you say, okay, now everybody in the league, they're all reading the same things. They're all hearing the same. They're all looking at, well, here's how Rossi was used. He's going to have them over the barrel. He's going to be able to force their hand to make a trade. But somehow, some way, there's going to be somebody, Billy, at somewhere behind the scenes, has got to be saying to these teams, look, you can believe whatever you want, you can read whatever you want, but I don't have to deal this guy. And if you're not giving me more than that, I'll keep him. And I'm certain that that's how some of those trade talks are going. And I have faith that he'll find somebody, if he ends up being traded, that he'll find somebody that's willing to give a more fair market value for, to your point, a 23-year-old who's gotten better each year, scored 20 plus goals 2 years in a row, 60 points last year, and still produced even in a fourth line role in limited minutes in the playoffs. I mean, He had 3 points in 6 games in his first run to the playoffs, which, as I have mentioned earlier, is the same amount Kaprizov had. It's more than Boldy had at their first runs into the Stanley Cup playoffs. So I think I just hope that it doesn't end up being a deal where the Wild backed into a corner where have to accept less than market value for a guy that I think still has a lot of value.
Yeah, I agree with you. One guy they definitely are interested in is JJ Peterka. I've reported that for weeks. I think that it'll be interesting what happens there. I think a lot of these Buffalo players are really concerned about the future there. And, I think even Tage Thompson, Rasmus Dahlin, Alex Tuch, there just comes a point where you have to say to management, look, if we're not turning the corner here at some point, I have to leave too. I know if they've said that yet, but I know that there are a lot of teams, not just the Wild, that feel that maybe some Buffalo players could be picked out of there right now. Bowen Byram clearly is somebody that wants out, fired his agent. But JJ is the one that makes a lot of sense if you're the Wild. I just don't know if you could do that if Buffalo would even have interest in Rossi, or if you would have to be, if the Wild could get somebody like JJ Peterka and then re-sign him, if you could sit there and use Rossi in some other trade and then try to get JJ all around the same time. I think a lot of this stuff is going to come into fruition at the draft. It will be interesting to see. And one big reason why the trade route makes much more sense to me, I think, as you and I have talked a lot about, there's not a lot of sexiness on the free agent market right now. I mean, you can make a lot of mistakes there. Obviously, we know the Wild have interest in Brock Nelson, but there's not a lot of one player that is really. I don't know if you've watched Jesper Boquist for Florida the last couple of days, but man, is he a good player. Guy could fly. He's available this summer. He kind of reminds me of somebody that would be a much, much better Marcus Johansson to take that spot if you put him at left wing. But there's not a lot of great, those are the type of players that you're going to probably have to get in free agency.
Yeah, and I haven't watched this series closely enough to evaluate a guy like him, but I think he's not.
By the way, I'm just using him as an example of somebody that could be, available at some point. He's still got a little left on his deal.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of those same reasons that the offseason trades, not just for the Wild, but around the league, will be interesting to watch, because I do think, there's been a lot of grumblings coming from Buffalo, and the way you say, some of these guys are starting to question their future. I mean, it's been a decade and a half of talking about their future. I think anybody would start to question, is the future ever going to arrive in Buffalo? And this core of players that they've started, it's been a couple roster turnovers where they keep talking about a team loaded with young talent about to make the next step and just have never been able to do it. So it might be time for them to make some significant splashes in the trade market. And I think around the league, it'll be interesting to watch. And this time of year it's always interesting that way, because it feels like, for the teams that either didn't make the playoffs or got knocked out in the first round, which is 24 of the 32 teams, it feels like forever ago that they were even a part of this same season. And you've been talking about the offseason for these teams for seemingly forever, even though I know it's only been 3 weeks since the Wild season ended, and it feels like it's been 6 months. Yeah. And so it's a lot of speculation. There's a lot of time where you're watching other teams continue to play, and it just feels like it's forever until you actually get to that moment, when in reality, we're just barely over 30 days away from trades and free agency and the draft all starting to set the table for next year.
Without a doubt. By the way, just before we get to a couple Twitter questions, then we'll wrap up the show. Z Boyum, world champion, guy just keeps on winning, whether it's national championships, world junior golds. Hopefully he can either bring that to the Wild. So congratulations to him and Team USA. How about the loss by Team Canada in Denmark the other day? Sidney Crosby, Nathan McKinnon, Dean Evison as coach, and Denmark with very few NHL players figure out a way to win a puck battle there at the end and have a couple goals and win and knock them off in the quarterfinal. pretty unbelievable.
It was two in the last minute and a half, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And one with the extra attacker and then the game winner. And that was, and I hadn't watched that whole game, but I saw the end, and it wasn't like Canada outshot them 50-20. The shots were like 40-35 or something. It was Denmark had been in the game. The one that was most amazing to me, and I didn't realize it until I was watching the Team USA semifinal game, and all of a sudden I heard Gord Miller say that the U.S. hasn't won since 1933. It hadn't been in the final since like the 1950s or something like that. And it's like, what is that even possible? And sure enough, I mean, how is it possible that they went 90 years without winning a world championship? That's
crazy.
It's just unbelievable. But
that's
good for Team USA. Yeah. And when you look at the roster Team USA had, you wouldn't have thought that was the group that would get it done. I mean, they had some good players, but certainly wasn't the best they could send. And
no, but it was interesting that the team was essentially, other than Zach Werenski and Jeremy Swayman, the team was full of players that were sort of quote unquote snubbed from the Four Nations roster, and these guys badly wanted to show Bill Guerin and the staff that they deserved to be in the Olympic roster. And now suddenly the Team USA staff has some very, very hard decisions. Like, how can you not have Tage Thompson on that team? How can you not have Clayton Keller on that team? It'll be just really fascinating how they figure this out. They don't have unlimited rosters though, and those guys are going to have to replace other guys. Ryder Ritchie trying to win a Memorial Cup. Pay attention to him. There could be some news on him after the Memorial Cup as well. So we'll have we could have some news there. Let's take some Twitter questions. I'll just breeze through a couple. Buck Peterson asks, seems like the New York Rangers are thinking about a rebuild. I understand this trade just happened, but any chance that JT Miller could be available? Rossi, David Spacek had a pick, a first or second for JT Miller. That seems like an awful lot for JT. The other thing is, Anthony, this team needs forwards. Don't you agree? It's forwards that they're looking for. If you're trading Rossi, they don't need any more D. Sorry. I don't know why I thought Keandre Miller. No, JT is staying there. So I mean, I don't see that. The question is, what about a Kreider? Could you get him on the cheap?
Yeah, maybe. And, Kreider's coming off a pretty disappointing season. And I know we've talked a lot about how at some point, guys' games just, the age is a real thing. And I don't know if that's the case with Kreider. I don't know if, we didn't watch the Rangers play every night, but when we saw him, he was invisible. And, you'd have to dig in a lot deeper to see.
He looks like he's gotten old quick.
Yeah, and we just saw it this year with Gus Nyquist when he arrived. That sometimes it just happens, and it can happen overnight. And perhaps because the year before, Kreider was terrific, but this year, boy, I don't know. It depends on the price. With all these guys, it's always the price. And if you buy low and a low risk, potentially high reward type situation where maybe you catch lightning in a bottle, where it was a guy that was just either banged up or not in the right spot or something that led to the down year, maybe. But boy, he wouldn't be the type of guy that I'd be wanting to move a major asset.
Yeah. I do agree that JT Miller would be somebody that the Wild would love. I just don't see how it's even feasible to, when they gave up what they gave up to get him, that they would even want to entertain. I think they want him to be part of this entire thing. When you agree, Anthony, it's very unlikely to me.
I agree. I think the price for Miller would probably exceed what Minnesota is willing to do.
Yep, totally agree. Somebody asked me to clarify the Wild cap situation. I mean, essentially the cap situation is they got about $16 million in cap space. And that's before re-signing a guy like Rossi, if they re-sign him, Chisholm, players like that. But they also, that's not just $16 million to spend this summer. The one thing that we saw this year is you better leave yourself some cap space going into the year, or you could wind up in a lot of issues. And, Anthony, I mean, the other thing is that's not that you have to fill the rest of your roster out. I mean, they, clearly have some bottom six holes that they got to fill out. Their D is pretty much set. But they've it's not just unlimited cap space. So that's what it comes down to. Wouldn't you agree? Like, you can't just go out and aim. And the other thing is that, again, as we've talked about, there's not a lot of great players available this offseason, at least via free agency. So to me, it's like you'd rather, I think, wait until next year and try to spend it. I know that the clock is ticking and he feels like he's got to make some moves now, but the last thing you want to do is make some bad moves.
Yeah, everybody in hockey knows that some of the biggest mistakes in the league are made the first couple of days of July, where so many guys get overpaid year after year in that spot. And it's all supply and demand. And it can be in a lesser free agent class that some of the biggest mistakes can be made, because you look at it and say, well, he's the best guy out there. I've got the money. Let's bring him in. And I think you have to be really careful with that right now. I don't know that if you're the Wild, you want to sit back and just say, well, let's just hold on to our cash until the following year. I don't think you'll see that. But I think the point is valid that you don't want to put yourself into a spot where you have zero flexibility going into the season, because it's not out of the realm of possibility that we talk about all these potential trades, that you could see something even into the season with this team if
100%.
all of a sudden things start to, whether in Minnesota or somewhere else, where all of a sudden, let's say Buffalo doesn't make any major moves during the offseason, but their season starts the same way that the last decade and a half have done. All of a sudden, that the right deal might present itself during the season.
Yeah. But to that 16 point whatever $1 million, you can read The Athletic to see we've documented. That includes all 7D if you're including Boyum and Juracek on the team. That's Faber, that's Bogosian, that's Middleton, but it's Brodin and Jared. So it's barring any trades. But it's up front where they need that 16 million is going to have to be filled in. They right now only have 9 guys signed. If you include Kaprizov, Boldy, Eriksson Ek, Zuccarello, Foligno, Hartman, Trenyan, Goudreau, and Ogren. So again, 9 of your 13 forwards. So that 16 is going to have to be spread through that. And that includes, again, Rossi as a RFA. That, by the way, also includes Chisholm as a UFA. So they've got, they don't have unlimited cap space. That's definitely for sure. Blair wants to know, any chance they retire Spurgeon's number 46 someday? I think there's a chance. I mean, if you think it from a defense standpoint, he's done everything that Nico Koivu did in terms of games played, everything that he's, he's going to wind up playing 1,000 games in this uniform.
Yeah, I think if you make the comparison to the only jersey they have retired, Spurgeon is certainly at a different position, going to it's hard to say matched, because you're not comparing apples to apples, but he will have had a very similar tenure with the Wild to what Nico had.
Yeah.
Longtime captain, really a high quality guy, a good leader. And yeah, I think there's a chance for sure. I think if, let's just say that Spurgeon plays out his contract with Minnesota, remains the captain, which I don't know any reason why either of those things would be true. And then let's say this team actually does have some playoff success over the next couple of seasons, then I think it's a no-brainer.
Yep. Anthony, if you had to pick one place where Mitch Marner is going to wind up, where would it be? I'll go first. I'll go Utah.
Well, Utah would not have been on my list. Have you talked to somebody there?
No, I just think they're going to make some big swing this summer. I think he's going to want to come to the States. I think he's going to want less noise. And I think that you look at Utah, and they are an up and coming team with a lot of young talent, from the Kellers to the obviously Gunthers and Coolies and players like that. I just think that they're going to go and offer him a bunch of money.
Yeah, I haven't given a ton of thought. I haven't looked at like what teams might have dollars to spend, but
Carolina's definitely going to go after him. Anaheim's definitely going to go after him.
Well, actually, it's funny you mentioned those two teams, because Carolina was the one that popped into my head, and I don't know what their cap situation is, but it was interesting how, remember a couple of years ago, and this goes back to what we talked about earlier in the show with their style of play, and there was a lot of talk about puck possession and controlling the flow, and all of that works great, but at some point you have to have guys who can finish. Last year they took their shot with Jake Gensel, and it didn't change their result. They still couldn't score when they bumped into the wrong team in the playoffs. And now we're seeing the same thing now. So maybe this is the next guy they take a shot at that can be that game-changing scorer. And it seems to make some sense for him to fit there. But Anaheim would be a possibility. They've got I think they feel pretty good about the direction they're headed. And among those teams in the West that are in a rebuilding mode, Anaheim might be a few steps ahead of like San Jose, for example. And perhaps Marner's a guy there that accelerates that process too.
If you could sign Brad Marchand, what would you give him? Question from Wild Boys 59.
Yeah, I mean, like meeting in the Wild's current cap situation.
Yeah, I don't know if he's even necessarily saying the Wild, but yeah, I just in general, I don't know. 1 year, $6 million, 2 years, 12. I don't know. I don't think I'd go too much higher over 6 at his age. But I think what he adds to your locker room is worth it, and he could still absolutely produce on the ice. I mean, it's amazing watching what he's doing with Anton Lundell and Listerrainen down here and how he's really guided those two along. I've got to think that, Florida will try to re-sign him, but they've got bigger fish. They got Sam Bennett to deal with. It could cost them Aaron Ekblad. Marchand was saying the other day to us that he doesn't love the heat. He loves the cold and the snow and things like that. So I told him, what place that has cold and snow? And so I'm already trying to recruit him to Minnesota.
Yeah, I don't know. Same conversation we were just having about some of those guys where you just don't know when age becomes a factor. And I think it's more with him term than AAV for sure. And who knows? I don't know what other people would offer, but I'm not sure I'd want to go past 2 years at this point. But sometimes you have to match what somebody else offers. And that's why when we make the comment that mistakes are made in early July, that's why. It's because, all right, this is the best guy out there. And in order to get him, this is what it's going to cost because somebody else offered him more than what we think he's worth. But in order to get the deal done, you have to be willing to have the best offer on the table.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Let's do it. We have a lot of other questions, but we'll save them for next week's show. Pay attention to when our next live show is. Obviously, a big month ahead for the Wild between what's going on with Rossi, with Kirill Kaprizov, things like that, and trying to re-sign him on July 1. That's priority number one this offseason. The one thing I will tell you is that between series, I am going to catch up with people around the Wild after their pro meetings and try to figure out exactly what's going on. So there'll be a bunch of Wild stories on the horizon. Joe Smith and I will also be looking at teams that might have an interest in Marco Rossi and a story that's coming out, I believe, early next week. So there will be a lot of Wild news this upcoming month as well. Anthony, thanks very much for what time's the drop of the puck today for you?
First pitch is at 1 o'clock Eastern time today. So it's an early sun up start to make sure I was done in time to catch the bus over to the ballpark. And I got my first 8,000 steps in though during the show. So that's good.
I could tell you were doing something.
Well, I got trying to keep a streak alive of getting 12,000 a day, and figured that because now I had this replaced my workout this morning. So the walking and talking to Michael Russo, that's got to count for more. That's more calories than just your normal walk.
Yeah, that is a workout. All right, thanks to our sponsors, Aquarius Home Services, your local authorized dealer for Connecticut water treatment systems, Clamshell Beach Resorts, Giggly THC Beverages, Onyx Maps, Twill in the Edina Galleria, and Royal Credit Union. Talk to you next week, Anthony.
Sounds good.
So much coming out, there's nothing going in. I know that you feel like you're never gonna win. Oh, but the world